Okay, cool. I think I'm on. I'm going to go ahead and get started with today's live. Um, Today, I want to talk about a question that actually a parent recently asked me, and that I actually get quite often. This parent asked me, "What is too harsh of a boundary for a kid?" And if you've probably wondered this yourself. Maybe you set a boundary like taking away dinner if your child leaves the table, or no more of something after you had said it. And then you ask, wait a second, was that like too much of a boundary to hold? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how to know the difference between healthy limits and overcorrecting, and how to feel confident in a way that you know that you're following through in accordance with what you want to see. Parents usually feel stuck between two different extremes. On one end, you don't want to be a pushover. And then on the other end, you don't want to be the kind of parent that you had growing up that yells and punishes for everything, right? So, how do you know when the boundary is firm and when it is too much? I want to emphasize a point here that you're not really asking if the boundary is too much. What you really are asking here is my consequence fair, respectful, and effective? And you ask that because what you want to know is if your actions are actually aligned with who you want to be as a parent. So, is my consequence fair, respectful, and effective? That's what we're going to be answering today. And if you are the kind of parent who is probably already thinking, there is no other way, Elmi. I have to be harsh because if I try to be anything less than harsh, then my kid will walk all over me. I want to start and emphasize gentle does not mean permissive. It actually means grounded. I call this calm presence. You're steady, you're calm, you're firm. It doesn't mean that you change your boundaries. It just means that when you show up with your boundaries, you are actually calm and present and grounded, and you can handle the chaos. You can be warm and firm. They're not mutually exclusive. And in fact, kids are more likely to push boundaries when they feel that they don't have a space for that chaos to occur, when they feel disconnected. So, connection and calm presence doesn't weaken your authority and doesn't take things away from you. It actually strengthens how much you can influence your child. Now, let's go over why we might be harsh or think that we are being too harsh as parents. Like when it actually happens, why does that happen? And when it does not happen, why do we think that it does? When we feel disrespected, ignore, or like we are losing control, we sometimes overreact or go harder than we mean to. It's not usually because we're mean, it is because we're either tired, frustrated, annoyed. We have like building up to us, and then it goes unchecked. Worried is that it's like now we get worried that it is now or never. We either teach the lesson now or they're never going to learn. So we really jump to these really harsh consequences without asking ourselves the questions first. We're kind of like reactive. So we don't ask ourselves, is my child capable of doing what I asked? Did they know the expectation prior to me implementing this consequence? Was this a power move? Like, was this basically ego driven for me where I want to be in control because I'm the parent? Or was this just a kid being a kid? We typically, in those moments of reaction, do not stop to think about those things. So, let's answer that question. What is too harsh? It's not necessarily about the tone or the consequences, it's about what's driving the boundary. A harsh boundary often comes from a place of fear, a place of frustration, a place of reaction, overreaction. It sounds something like, I'm doing this because I'm afraid that they'll never learn. I'm doing this because I'm afraid that this makes my child a bad child or it makes me a bad parent. I am doing this because this is how I was raised, or I am doing this because I feel disrespected, annoyed, frustrated, and I need to take that control back. These boundaries tend to be rigid, disconnecting, and sometimes even punishing. Now, on the other hand, a healthy boundary is calm and it's clear. It's rooted in your values as a parent, not your stress. It teaches your child what to expect instead of what to fear. So let's say that your child gets up from dinner without eating much, and your boundary or your rule is if you get up from the table at dinner time, the kitchen is closed. A harsh response might be, that's it. No food for you for the rest of the night. You're going to go hungry. You can go into your room. Don't come back. You had your chance. That is a harsh boundary, especially if you did not let your child know in advance that getting up from the table would lead to that consequence. Now, a healthy boundary or a healthy one might be one, you let your child know that your kitchen is closed after they get up from the table. And instead of punishing them or shaming them, you say, hey, it looks like you're not hungry right now. The kitchen will be closed until breakfast, but I am here if you need water or snuggles before bedtime. It's the same boundary, but it's a different energy. It is okay for you to close your kitchen if that is something that you value as a parent or as a family. As long as you make the expectation clear and your child is capable of doing it, then it is an okay boundary to establish. It's just how do you establish it? What energy do you put out into that boundary is whether it's going to make it harsh or not. So, here are four steps on how to know if you are being too harsh, if you ever feel like you don't know. The first step is to ask yourself, was the expectation clear and reasonable? Did you let your child know in advance what was expected of them? And is your child capable of doing what you expect them to do? Kids can only follow rules and expectations that they understand. So, if you are clear and you are reasonable with your expectations, then you will feel more confident that any limit that you set is fair. So, for example, dinner is done at 6:30. If you get up, that tells me that you're done. That is clear. It's not harsh. This is what is happening. It's just what it is. We close it down at 6:30. You're not saying I'm not feeding you ever again. You're a bad kid for not eating. None of that. You're just simply saying this is the expectation. Step number 2 is to ask yourself, is this a natural or a logical consequence? A logical consequence is related to the behavior. So they link up. Kids connect the dots between their actions and outcomes when they make sense. I'll give you an example. Removing the food when they leave the table is logical. It's not punishment, it's the result of the choice they made. They knew that if they leave the table, the kitchen is closed. So it is logical. You get up from the table, I remove the food, period. A bad example of this would be putting them on timeout for leaving the table. That's not logical. Timeout has nothing to do with them eating at the table, it has nothing to do with them getting up from the table. So, is your consequence natural or logical? When the consequence is natural or logical, they learn, not just react in fear or confusion or follow your expectations out of wanting to be compliant. So they please you. They actually just make sense. Step number 3 is to ask yourself, would I still do this if someone else was watching? This gives you a perspective check. Remember that the question that you are subconsciously trying to answer when you ask yourself, is this a too harsh of a boundary? Is my consequence fair, respectful, and effective? And you ask that because you want to know if your actions are aligned with who you want to be as a parent and your values as a parent. People serve as accountability for who we want to be. So, would you do this if someone else was watching? This question allows you to reconnect with your own values, not just your emotions, because a lot of the times we will do things that are emotional in nature and that don't align with our values or who we want to be as parents or as people. So it allows you to reconnect with those values and not your emotions. When you do this, you stay consistent with the parent you want to be, not the one that defaults when you are under pressure. If you feel, I would say in general, if you feel proud of explaining your boundary to a teacher, a therapist, another parent, your family, it's probably a fair one. Like if you can hold your ground on your explanation, it's probably reasonable. And step number four is to ask yourself, did I lead with connection before correction? Connection before correction is about prioritizing the relationship before the rule. Kids are more likely to follow rules when they feel connected because there is trust built into that relationship. This will lead to less pushback, fewer power struggles, like even just a quick, "Hey buddy, I know it's hard to pause your game, but it's time for dinner." Like if you just use that small sentence to be like, "I get this is hard. You still have to do it." That actually creates a bigger difference in how much you can influence your child. A couple of top mistakes to avoid is going all in for small things. Save your big consequences for big issues. Like, not every limit needs to be a hill to die on. I tell this to parents all the time. Pick your non negotiables and stand by them, and don't worry about anything else. Like, what are your non negotiables? Everything else can be compromised, can be something else. But when you really pick your non negotiables, then your child is able to learn that you're going to be consistent on those, because it's going to be impossible for you to be 100% of the time consistent on everything. So just pick the things that you want to be consistent on. And then the second mistake to avoid is to changing your mind out of guilt. If you made a fair call, stick to it. And then if it was too harsh, own it and then reset the plan next time. Like if you set up a boundary, stick with it. And then next time if you feel like it was too harsh or something like that, then adjust it according to that new information that you now have on that boundary. And with that, I will open it up for some questions. I think I already have some coming in, so let me look. Can you show an example of what connection before correction looks like in application? A lot of parents misunderstand this as over coddling parents. Yeah. So, kind of like the example that I already gave, you want to have a quick statement about the experience that the child is having. So, example, I am going to establish the boundary that it's time for screens to be off. I'm going to say, I understand you really want to be in doing that. I understand it's really hard to turn off your iPad. I understand you want to keep playing that game. I get it. It's frustrating. We still have to turn it off. So the time of the connection is right before you are acknowledging that the experience that the child is having is hard, or it is frustrating, or it is annoying, whatever it might be, and you're still holding the boundary. What the mistake that a lot of parents make is one saying, "Oh, it's not that big of a deal. Come on, just turn it off. It's not a big deal." So, not acknowledging the experience actually disconnects the child. And then also just not continuing the boundary. That would be the over coddling part, not necessarily when you are connecting. So, just a short statement that acknowledges the child's lived experience, what they are experiencing in that moment. That is connection before correction. How much preload is required to set proper expectations? Really good question. I usually recommend 3 to 5 times of preloading before you set a new expectation, meaning you're going to tell or remind that child at least 3 to 5 times before you actually implement the expectation. So, for example, if you are going to implement this new expectation that if you get up from the table, the kitchen is closed, you want to remind your child at the beginning of the day, starting at breakfast, all the way to dinner. So you're going to implement the boundary at dinner, all the way from breakfast to dinner, 3 to 5 times, that if they get up from the table, the kitchen will be closed. So 3 to 5 times. Do you connect before you correct when the child is in the middle of an outburst? 100%, always. Why? Because in the middle of an outburst, there is 0% chance that your child has any learning capability. Why? Because they are completely dysregulated. Their survival brain, meaning all of their nervous system, is completely offline. Their ability to think, to rationalize, to understand, to think logically is entirely offline. So, in order for your child to learn, they are going to need to be online with that thinking brain activated. So, if you want to activate the thinking brain faster, you can activate it faster by connecting before you correct. I got a question from a parent. What if part of me is reacting out of how I was raised? How do I stop repeating things I didn't want to repeat? That's a good question. And I actually get that often. A lot of the times, parents want to not be or do whatever their parents did, right? And the way to stop that, one, is be aware. I would also recommend that you have very clearly identified what is it that you want. What are your values as a parent? Who do you want to be as a parent? Because that is actually going to be your compass to understanding how you can break those cycles of not reacting by default. Naturally, all of us grew up with the way we were raised, and we accidentally repeat those cycles by default. So even when you are not noticing, in those moments where you are reacting, where you are dysregulated, you are going to do some of those things that you don't want to repeat. So to mitigate against that, you want to be very clear on what you don't want and what you do want, so that when you are encountered with those challenges, you can ask yourself, is this something that goes in line with who I want to be as a parent, or the values that I have as a parent? This way, you can start breaking that. Wow, it's a lot of questions on this popular topic. Let's see. Um, I like this one. It says, "You're saying harsh consequences don't work, but they're the only thing that gets results in my house. Isn't that proof that they do work?" I'll be very clear. Harsh consequences do work. They do. And they don't mean that they are the best option for your child. It depends on the outcome. Harsh consequences do work, but they are based on fear and punishment, and they also don't work long term. A big indicator of whether your consequence is working or not is to ask yourself this question: do I continue to deal with this problem on a daily basis? If the answer is yes, then your consequence is not working for the long term, because in the long term, you're not stopping that problem. So, if your consequence works, it usually works in the moment. That's it. It doesn't change behavior long term. Now, if that's what you want, and you're okay with like fear based, punishment based, then that's totally okay. They do work in the moment, not long term. If you want a long term relationship with your child built on trust, built on connection, if you want emotional safety, if you want emotionally resilient children, if you want to not deal with that behavioral problem in the long term, then harsh consequences are probably not going to be the next option, or the best option. I'm sorry. Let me see. Would I do sometimes I think to myself, would I do this if someone else was watching? And honestly, the answer is no. Does that mean it was too harsh? Hey, kudos to you for being honest. That's the goal of this strategy. This is a strategy. Would I do the same if somebody else was watching me? That means that is a strategy to help you align with your compass of the values and who you want to be as a parent, right? It doesn't I can't tell you whether it was too harsh or not because it's dependent on the scenario. But what I can tell you is that if you would not do that, if somebody else was watching, that means that whatever action you're taking is not aligned with your values and who you want to be as a parent. And so that gap between who you want to be as a parent and your values and what you're actually doing and who you are with your actions as a parent is actually the in between that is kind of painful for parents. So the fact that you're able to identify it, then that's great. It doesn't mean that it's harsh, but it does mean that there is something that needs to change for you to be in alignment with those values and who you want to be as a parent. I feel like you're saying I shouldn't react, but if I don't react, how will my child know that they crossed a line? Really good question. Because this is actually one that parents get confused a lot on reaction, harshness, anything of that sort, punishment does not mean that your child is not going to know. You are still holding the boundary and reacting just in a calm way, in a warm way. They are not mutually exclusive. The problem is that parents don't know how to make the distinction between a reaction that is appropriate, that is healthy, that is calm, that is warm, and a reaction that is harsh, punitive, shameful to kids. So you have to make that difference. You are still going to react and you are going to hold your boundary, and your child is going to know. You just don't have to do it in a way that creates this negative cycle of making your child feel shameful or anything like that. It can be done in a healthy way. They calmness and harshness are not the same thing. Being clear and firm and warm is not the same thing as being harsh. Is they're not mutually exclusive. Um, let me see. Can you explain the difference between a consequence and a punishment? I hear both terms all the time, but I honestly don't know how they are different. Really good question because honestly, both terms can be used interchangeably and are used interchangeably, but I'll give you how I view them. So a consequence can be positive or negative, right? That's a consequence. It can be neutral, positive, negative, it can be anything. So for example, a consequence of me being hungry and going to the fridge, my consequence is I'm able to get food and not be hungry. That's a consequence. It has no connotation to negative, positive, nothing. It's just a consequence, something that happens after something occurs. That's it. Punishment, on the other hand, is a negative consequence. You are adding pain or removing pleasure as a consequence for an act that you did. So, for example, punishment. I'm going to take away your iPad because you behave this way. I'm going to put you on timeout because you behave this way. Timeout, I added some type of pain for behaving a certain way. Taking away your iPad, I'm removing something that you like for acting a certain way. So, punishment is a negative consequence that adds pain or removes pleasure for acting a certain way. A consequence is just something that happens, it's a cause and effect. Happens because you did something, cause and effect, not positive, not negative. That's how they are different. Let me see. Are there specific circumstances when punishment is not the right consequences? So, It depends on the circumstance. It really, really depends on the circumstance and also like the family values. Generally speaking, punishment is a type of consequence that is less likely to be effective in the long term. Punishment will be effective in reducing or stopping a behavior in the moment, but it does not help in the long term. If you want that behavior to get better over time, punishment is not going to be your long term strategy. So it really, really depends. So, for example, if you have a child who is in a busy street and they're bolting across the street, and you are reprimanding them for, bolting across the street in a busy street where they can get like run over by a car or something like that, that would be appropriate, right? You want them to stop right there and then. Like yelling at them to stop would be an appropriate like type of consequence, which would be considered a punishment. Now, is the same reaction appropriate for, taking an extra minute on their screen time is different. So it depends on the situation, but generally speaking, punishment is not going to help you change a behavior or stop it in the long term. Let me see. How do I, as a parent, know what my values are? Oh, that's a great question. Generally speaking, I would say, like, if you have not thought about your values as a parent or who you want to be as a parent, you can start with noticing when those things come up. If you're asking yourself the question, hey, was I too harsh here? Or was I too soft here? That is probably an underlying value that you are not seeing that you can probably like think about. The thing that I recommend for parents to do to identify what values they have as a parent is to ask themselves this question: what kind of adult do I want my child to become? Think about like character traits, not like accomplishments, or you want them to be an engineer or a doctor. No, like who, as a person, what are their character traits? Do you want them to be independent? Do you want them to be kind, honest, emotionally resilient? That kind of stuff. Those tend to be the values that you want to have or enforce as a parent. And then once you have those, then you can use those values as your compass to decide how you want to parent. Maybe I'll do a next video on how to identify your parents. I get this question a lot. But with that, I think this is the last question that we have. I'll see you guys next time.